the big sign that says do not place anything on this keyboard, but it looks like I have to do that, so there we go. No, it's great to be here. It's an honor, really. You guys are an incredible group. I just was excited to just listen. Let's have another round of applause for that panel and everyone that participated in it too. Really incredible, and my hat's off to Steve Adami and Darren Norton, Salvation Army. Tom Wolf, of course, has been such a good friend. The whole panel up here has been amazing. Chief Tulloch, what you're doing is incredible. The DA, what she's doing now to change the conversation is a very big deal. And I'm here to tell you that what is going on here and what you're saying and thinking and experiencing is not unique to San Francisco, but your voice is needed now more than ever. I heard Jabari, is he still here? Jabari, who just gave the microphone. He talked about, this harm reduction thing came out of nowhere. Actually, it didn't come out of nowhere, folks. This was part of a sustained, very planned out, multi-billion-dollar, well-thought-out strategy to normalize drug use in society and to make some people rich and some people poor. That is the reality of what we're talking about. And so we're here to celebrate recovery. We're here I'm back in San Francisco. I went to school just across the bay, over at Cal, 25 years ago. Boy, a lot's changed around. Go Bears! But a lot's changed around here, right? And not necessarily for the better in terms of the reputation. I had a group there. I was an anti-drug activist way back when. We had a group called Citizens for a Drug-Free Berkeley. I know, don't laugh. We like to say it was like the Coalition for a Wine-Free France, but the reality was, they were talking about normalizing drug use back then too, way before fentanyl. They had the pot shops for medical purposes. They had the mushrooms that were coming on. The ecstasy MDMA was killing folks. We used to come to these clubs out here. It's the rave scene. This is late 90s. Anybody relate to that? You remember that? Right. And so we saw people dying. We were passing out postcards, I remember, of this is your brain on drugs. Not the egg, though, the actual brain on drugs, the MRI. To sort of freak people out as they were going into their club. And maybe we changed some minds, but we lost a lot of people then. But what's happening now is on a scale we've never seen before, folks. And our response to it cannot be to simply normalize and perpetuate and make it more comfortable to be in this harmful disease. Rather than hearing about the fact that we should be universal and saying we need, what the best harm reduction is, folks? Harm prevention. Drug treatment. And unfortunately, harm reduction, though, in some circles might have been well-intentioned with some people on the ground, has turned into harm promotion. And so when we go from one extreme to the other, we don't want to be locking up our brothers and sisters, but we also don't want to be encouraging and saying this is okay, and we're going to make it more comfortable for you to use drugs. We don't want to make heart attacks more comfortable. We don't want to make any of these diseases more comfortable. We want to prevent them in the first place. Can you imagine if our only response to actually heart attacks or diabetes in this country was to say, we hope we have enough insulin for you and heart defibrillators, and if something goes wrong, I hope to God that there's a defibrillator in your building, and we'll just kind of hope for the best. No. So why are we doing that with addiction? Well, I actually would say we're doing that with addiction, again, because there are people that make a lot of money off this. If you think that the normalization and commercialization movement of drugs in this country stops with weed, or stops with mushrooms, or now everyone in Silicon Valley wants to do psychedelics to reach their inner self. Because I guess $1 billion didn't help. But if we think it's going to stop there, we have another thing coming for us. We're made fun of for saying that we want to prevent drug use, or we want to work towards drug-free society. Who made fun of people for saying we want a crime-free society? We want an AIDS-free society. We want a cancer-free society. These are goals. We may not be able to achieve it in our lifetime, but we don't want our goal to be, I just want 100 of my friends to die, not 110. Right? So we got to set our goals high, no matter whether they're realistic or not. And, when people were fighting just around these streets 40 years ago, the stigma of, the gay man's cancer, if somebody said, well, just kind of, again, 50% of your friends dying is okay. Let's just leave it at that. We don't need, anti-HIV drugs, or we don't want to work for an AIDS-free society. That never would have happened. Of course we want tools like naloxone. No one is saying we're not going to have those. But folks, as we heard earlier, yes, we meet people where they're at, but we don't leave them there. That's not a policy to hang your hat on. We want to help show them the way. No, I had someone, an activist, come to me, doesn't elect me, and said, no, Kevin, we want to meet them where they're at and let them tell us what they need. Well, when you're under this disease of addiction, you know what you need? A lot of drugs. Why would you stop using drugs, actually? It feels very good. For a lot of people, yes, some people stop because their world's crumbling around them, but for a lot of people, they don't see that. Denial is the hallmark of addiction. Denial from the individual. I can stop at any time I want. We've heard that before. Denial from society. If we just give you tools to use comfortably, you will use between 9 and 3 in this room at this time with your people around, 911 ready to call. That's not how that works. And so people are trying to apply, maybe again, some well-intentioned folks, but some of these lofty principles to this chaotic disease of addiction. And with this chaotic disease of addiction, we have to help people with more than just, we'll make your drug use comfortable. Harm reduction has been used to change the goalposts on this. Rather than focusing on preventing, how many people are in treatment, how long are you there for? How about we rate the government on how they fund treatment that's not more than just 20 or 30 days? Can you imagine if we did that? On the one hand, we're saying it's a disease, it's a health issue. Yeah, it's a disease, but only for 28 and a half days if your insurance covers it, if you can make it at this time. That's not how it works. So we meet them where they're at, but we don't leave them where they're at. And it's amazing we're here in San Francisco. I went to a conference 25, 30 years ago, way back when, hosted by the Drug Policy Alliance, that said we need to send people into schools who use drugs successfully to show kids that we can actually use drugs safely. That's a real quote. They said, why don't we send all the failed drug users to schools to talk about, they failed at their drug use, that's why they were addicted. But a lot of people, they can maintain it. I can't even say that with a straight face, but that was what was said. And if I told you the people who were in that room there, you'd recognize every single name because they've gone on to the highest offices in the land, and I won't leave names out of it because I was told not to get everybody in trouble here when I came back. But that's what, so if we think this is surprising that this came out of nowhere, it didn't come out of nowhere. It's part of a whole industrial complex to make a ton of money for a small number of nonprofits, for a small number of think tanks, funded, frankly, I gotta say, by old white billionaires that just kind of want to use drugs and think everyone else should too. And that's who's, by the way, making them. By the way, I was trying to, check in since you've legalized some drugs here. They said we were going to have social equity after we legalized some of the drugs that you've already legalized. How's that going? You're all made your millions in the marijuana industry yet, in the psychedelics industry yet? That's what we were told. That's the whole justification for it. So they're taking a problem we all agree with. We do not want to overly incarcerate. We do not want to criminalize addiction. We do not want to criminalize users. But they are twisting that, taking that for their own benefit, for their own pocketbook, and frankly for their own behavior, because half these people are high anyway. So that's really the issue we're talking about. Now, they tried to do this in Oregon. You might have heard. They decriminalized drugs. They said, no, we're not legalizing, we're decriminalizing, because that wording, the pollsters told us, polls much better than legalizing. Don't use the L word, because legalizing fentanyl, who wants to do that? But we're decriminalizing. We want treatment over jail. That's what they said. Well, who can vote against that? 2020, 60% of people voted for it. Guess what? They have the highest number of overdoses today in the country. They have the worst treatment retention record in the country. You know why? Treatment was never part of it. That was never supposed to be part of it. It was a version of harm reduction that says, you just do whatever the heck you want, and we don't really want to hear about it. And if you need Narcan, we'll make sure it's, we have some vending machines around and a couple injection rooms for you too. And we did some polling about a year ago because we said this isn't right. This is going horribly wrong. 74% of Black Oregonians said, we don't like this law anymore. 79% of Hispanics, even 60% of white liberals who all voted for this, thinking they were doing the right thing, they said this has been a disaster. We've increased homelessness, we've increased crime, we've increased overdoses. Who is this benefit? Then they looked to see who it was benefiting, because they said, it's got to be benefiting somebody, because it's been the law for 3 years. And at $5 million went into passing it. Look it up. $5 million in the midst of the pandemic, 2020, went in by one organization, the Drug Policy Alliance, I'll name them again. And they went in there and promised treatment over jail, and then they found out that it was a handful of nonprofits. By the way, nonprofit. You know, when you're in a nonprofit, you can make like $1 million a year in a salary. It just means you don't have a shareholder. It doesn't mean you don't make money. And so they were collecting all those grants, all the funding. The funding was supposed to come from pot sales. And I'm just trying to say, well, wait a minute. You're going to take funding from one addiction and think that you're going to be subsidizing and helping other addictions? It's like saying I'm going to, raise the speed limit to 150 for everyone that can pay $1,000, and then we're going to use that money to try and build a hospital for all the crashes we're going to get because everyone's going to be speeding. It's backwards. But I'm happy to say today that Measure 110 in Oregon has been completely repealed because of people like you speaking out. Even with a hostile political establishment, much more hostile, I can't believe I'm saying this, than here. Here as in San Francisco, I like the new folks. When I was going here, you could look up who was in charge. That's why we got in this mess. But the reality was, they did that even though that political establishment promised they weren't going to repeal it because they saw it as a culture war that they were fighting to just let people use drugs unless it got really bad, and then we would see what we would do. But it was repealed. So folks, harm reduction, is there room for it? Of course there is, but listen, it's a means, not an end. That's it. That's all you have to remember. It is a means, not an end. The end is recovery. And that's actually the beginning. That's the message that we have. So we have room for harm reduction interventions. Yeah, that is meant for the end of the continuum, the whole continuum of drug use. That is at the very end when you get the very hard to reach populations, getting them in the door. But it's not meant for everybody there. Everyone comes at this differently. It is not one size fits all. So, of course we do, but we support that, but again, as a means. We also don't live in a fantasy world where this harm reduction, and you were talking about this, Richard, that said it's a substitute for real recovery, for connection. Naloxone ain't going to give you a new connection your whole life. It'll, connect your brain for a second so that you stay alive. We need it. But that's not long-term connection. And it's certainly not freedom. Do you know that the average person who's overdosed on Narcan will die, 15% of them will die within a year? The average person Narcan right now as we speak, it's their 13th time this year already. If that doesn't speak to a failure of what we're doing as a society, I really don't know what is. So we're looking for freedom from the enslavement of this addiction, of chemical slavery, your brain being taken over. And of course it's a disease, but it's not like other diseases actually, and that might be controversial to say. My old mentor, Herb Cleaver out of New York, wonderful guy. He went to Columbia University, he would talk about how addiction is a disease, but it's not like a disease of the elbow. And what that means is it's a biobehavioral disorder. It does respond, more likely than not, everyone's different, but more likely than not, it will respond to carrots and sticks. Who talked about accountability earlier? Incentives. It does respond to that. I have a 102-year-old grandfather-in-law and a 94-year-old grandmother-in-law. And the 102-year-old's doing great. The 94-year-old has short-term dementia. If I were to tell her, because that's a brain disease. Dementia is a brain disease. If I were to tell her, Granny, if you remember my name tomorrow, I'm going to give you $1 million. Or I'm going to give you what you want. Whatever it is. You get a new job. She doesn't want a new job, but you can imagine. That's not her. She's not going to remember my name tomorrow because I've offered her that incentive. I've offered her a second chance of life. She's not. That is a purely biological. Now, are there ways to help it? Can she learn a little bit? Yeah, a little here and there. But addiction is different. It does respond to incentives. So if your only incentive is that there's a shooting gallery down the street, drug dealers on your corner, and you're supportive housing, and you're fighting to get into a 30-day program, which is not going to be sustained, how are we giving you a winning chance? We're not, and it's horrible because the disease of addiction is costing our country more money than any other public health challenge. I mean, during the pandemic, we learned how to wash our hands again. You remember that? Because we know prevention works. We are, as a country, invested tens of millions of dollars in videos and people on TV in every county in this nation. every county health leader. They were showing us how to wash our hands. Think about that. Something that you learned when you were probably 3 years old. But why were they were doing that? Because prevention is so important. What are we doing here? Other than to say, if you're using and you choose to use, here's a safe place where you can do it. Don't forget your Narcan, your straw, your supplies. That doesn't seem to be the right response at all. So that is what we want to keep promoting, is this miracle of recovery. And it is a miracle because, let me tell you, it's the only disease where you're a better person after you've had it than before you had it. Think about that. So it's really about love, actually, and it's about true love. And loving someone so much that you will do anything to help them. But we cannot do this alone. We need our community. That's why all of you are so inspiring to me, hearing these comments. That young man's comment over there about, what about young men growing up, wanting to be good dads? We got to give him a chance. I don't want to throw an old Ziploc of straws and needles at him. That's not a chance. It's amazing. Where are the job opportunities? Where are the economic opportunities? And I'm not just talking about, a $1,000 grant to open a weed store next door. By the way, that seems to be the only, I wasn't allowed to talk about it, I have to just for a second. That seems to be the only area where we're caring about social equity. I mean, think about it. When you've ever heard about social equity licenses, it has to do with selling drugs. Can we lift us up a little bit? Can we be lifted up a little bit? Can we raise the bar? Because again, I can tell you who's making money from those drugs. It's not the communities that actually would benefit from those funds. So we have to raise the bar. And that's why we're here. We're not only reminding San Francisco and our elected leaders, but we're reminding the world that recovery is real. We demand it, that it's essential, and it's the only humane solution to this crisis. That we don't want to be told that we can do something that is inherently dangerous safely. People say, well, fentanyl's here, so it's just something we can do about it. Yeah, there's something to do about it. Not use it. And we can teach you. We're not saying just, we're not just leaving you on the corner. That's where we're meeting you where you're at. We got that. Of course we are. By the way, I find it kind of it's like insulting when they say, well, Kevin, you're not meeting people where they're at. Of course, we're always meeting people where they're at. I'm not meeting you over here. I'm meeting you where you are. Because you probably can't walk. So I'm meeting you where you are. But we're going to take you where you need to be. To live. Not live under enslavement to these chemicals and to dependence. And to a life that's not worth living. People say, well, but then we're just monitoring the overdose rates. I care more about overdose rates. I want to know how many of those people feel good today. How many of them are getting a job? How many of them are being good parents and good siblings? Addiction affects not just you. It's such a self-centered thing to say that all we need to do is throw naloxone at you and make sure your drug doesn't have fentanyl in it if you can read the second line of the test strip. And then that way, that's selfish. Because you're affecting other people. You're affecting your daughter, your son, your husband, your wife, your brother, your sister, your mama, your dad. You're affecting all of them. This is has to be a family effort because families are affected. So I'm not just, I'm looking at overdoses. I want them to go down. But I'm also looking at how many families get to be kept together. I'm also looking at how many people are satisfied with their life and feel good about themselves, good enough that they're able to contribute to society. That's what recovery is. It's not just a life free of drugs for a couple days. It's a life worth living. And that is what we're always going to push. We will do this. The world is watching right here, the amazing things that are happening that you're all a part of. I'm glad I could just be a tiny part of it today. I love you all. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.